Hi, I'm Andy Watkins. We live in an increasingly individualized society. Every day, we work on our individual specialized tasks, and then we go home and watch Netflix until we fall asleep. This wasn't always the case, but increasingly, public libraries and parks are being sold off to corporations to create co-working spaces and gyms, right? So these spaces that used to be these monuments to joy in our sense of aesthetics, where you could just read or have a run, now we have this sterile, emotionally dead experience where we can pay for the privilege of what we could otherwise do naturally. One powerful force against this alienating individualism is solidarity. In solidarity, we accept our comrades' struggles as our own. We care for each other because we genuinely love each other. So let's talk about our comrades' struggles. Right now, 2/5 of American families could not survive a $400 emergency. According to the UW Postdocs Union, almost 80% of postdocs and graduate students are classified as rent-burdened. 1/3 of American families are classified by some other metrics as financially precarious. This is an absolutely devastating state of affairs, and it's balanced against postdoc salaries and graduate student salaries that are meager, and a very unevenly distributed set of stresses. Some trainees have families. Some trainees have aging parents who might need personal attention or medical care. Some trainees have medical conditions of their own. So these stressors are asymmetrically distributed, but what we have are starvation wages to support ourselves on. But we can still all help each other. So one gratifying thing about being married to a doctor is that it ironically actually exposes you to a great deal of humility. There's this phrase that's particularly common in medicine. It's well-trodden sort of in all walks of life. There but for the grace of God go I. When your patient looks like hell and you're looking and feeling great, it's not because you're better or capable of enduring more. It's because you're luckier. I talked about a whole bunch of gruesome statistics in the last slide, and the traditional way to convey these kinds of numbers in a talk is to demand that audience members look to their left and then their right, and because of the denominators, some of them involved, up and down or something. But because of survivorship bias, I don't think that's really appropriate here. Most of those 2 out of 5, or most of those 80%, or most of those 1/3 just aren't in this room right now. We're the lucky ones. On the diversity committee, which I've served on for some time, I think we've done a lot of really valuable work in ensuring that we expand access and outreach to marginalized groups, and to making sure that truly unconscionable things don't happen at conferences. It's really important that marginalized groups aren't bullied out of the community once they're here, obviously. But while I have access to buying a house in a legal sense, I certainly don't have the ability to buy a house. And if we are really to expand the Rosetta community so that it reflects the demographics of this country or this planet, we have to directly fight against the financial realities that discriminate against every marginalized group on this planet. So we've created a nonprofit organization whose goal is to do precisely this. Its legal name is awful and generic. But the first initiative that we're going to undertake is directed at the Rosetta community. I've named it as embarrassingly as possible so that it will be seared into your memories. and you'll want to give it money so you don't have to look at it anymore. So here's the idea. This organization will give out grants to help alleviate some of these unexpected, unaddressable challenges. Especially as we start out, these grants are going to be reasonably small. They're going to help you with car repairs. They're not going to buy you a car. They will help you make rent. They won't help you put a down payment on a house. And on the other side, we will accept donations both from members of the community and from potentially outside organizations. Did this organization help you and now years later you have a good paying industry job? We will happily accept your money. Are you a corporation that would love to have your logo on a slide that appears every 6 months to improve your profile among Rosetta developers that you want to hire? We will also take your money. There is the potential for fraud in theory, because I don't want this to become a bureaucratic nightmare where you have to let us do a credit check on you before we give you $50 to buy lab snacks. But I think that there is, especially in a community that is as familiar with each other and morally cohesive as this one, that the chance that somebody is going to overcome all moral barriers to defrauding a charity for a fairly nominal amount of money, I think that's a limited possibility. And the much more realistic threat model is that you did actually need that $200, but you didn't want to talk about what you needed it for. You didn't need it to buy food for the next month. You needed it for, some minor luxury, right? Something that you construed as a minor luxury. But the early women's suffragist Helen Todd rested very much on this phrase that we fight not just for bread, but roses too. The idea being that a just society does not provide everyone within it with gruel for food and a tent for shelter. It's important in a just society that everyone living in it can thrive, not merely survive. And so if you want $50 to take your partner out on a date, if you want to take a cooking class, that's fine. Please come to us. We want to give you money. So there are a few different directions I want to take this organization as it grows and as it receives even its first donations. Right now, we're talking about this very limited program where we're just interacting with the Rosetta community. I could imagine very easily going to some other conferences and presenting our case and serving other life sciences students and other stage trainees. Eventually, we can expand to all students, and of course, by inference, humans and then just organic life. I don't like to start with limitations. Secondarily, though, there are other forms of mutual aid that aren't just mediated by cold hard cash. I haven't driven a car since high school. I know nothing of car repair. I guarantee you that 10 people in this room can teach me a whole lot that I'm going to have to know when I move back to California and start driving regularly again. There are plenty of people who know basic plumbing. I know nothing of that. Am I just creating a paid version of WikiHow for me? Maybe. There are a lot of people who have cooking skills that I don't have. There are a lot of people who don't have cooking skills that I have. I make good pie crust. There are Vikram Mulligans who are really good at computer graphics, and I still can't figure out how to use Blender. I don't think that's Blender. It's an old version of Blender. See, I couldn't even recognize that. This has been my problem this whole time. So I think that this organization can host skills sharing events where this community can become more resilient to these various stresses. If we don't need to get our cars repaired as frequently because we can do some basic maintenance on our own, then we as a community can resist these pressures a little bit better. So right now we are 6 people. You know several of these people who are in the audience right now. Brian is here and Sam is here. Steph is unchained. She's on the loose. Hope couldn't make it. And Dosun is one of my collaborators from Northwestern outside the community who was really interested in the organization, and I think that having somebody who's not Rosetta affiliated per se is a useful piece of oversight. We have an email address if you would like to become involved in the actual organization and administration of this nascent charity, then please contact me. Secondarily, we now have a website. If you aren't necessarily interested in administering this charity, but you do have too much money, if you go there and sign up for the email list that is the only feature of the website right now, then once we have payment processing set up, we'll be able to take your cash. But please talk to me about this organization, directions that you think it might be able to take. I would absolutely love to talk to each and every one of you about how this kind of organization could better serve the community. And I have ample time for questions right now. I was facing forward, so I saw Rich's hand first.
So this sounds great. I mean, especially in New York, housing and these rent-related issues for postdocs and students are just tremendously complex. I would say that in addition to trying to get money and make the infrastructure for mutual aid, perhaps also have part of the this unit that works with deans and university and institutional leadership, because sometimes people just haven't had the chairs of departments, for example, just haven't had the bandwidth to push on this enough. So at NYU, we actually got housing stipends for our biology and our CS and our CDS students. And that has changed and really helped things. We also have, I don't think it was that good when you were there. Sorry, man. So that's a big positive. But it came from just basically putting it on the radar of the leadership over and over again. And it took about 5 years before they recognized it as a key issue. And the same goes for postdocs. So like here at the foundation, it took us a while to get the foundation to support housing for the fellows, but they just announced last month at the staff meeting that they're getting an apartment building for the postdocs and the fellows at the institution. And I don't think that the reason it didn't happen when we started the institute 5 years ago was just that it wasn't on the radar. It wasn't sort of pushed forward as a key issue. So in addition to trying to get billionaires to give you money to top up this thing, I think, finding the right senior leadership. Yeah. And so, for example, whatever grad school Riju's in, figure out who his dean is and just go and see if you can sit down with that dean right away with, a whole bunch of communists with you in the room.
To be clear, we will also accept donations from thousandaires. We're not shooting for the top here. But no, that's a great idea. I think that an important role that we can serve is as gadflies with a little extra time to make sure that we're bringing up these issues with every university admin that we can. Absolutely, I think that's a great idea. I had seen Vikram's hand first, but I see you. You're not behind the pillar. What's up?
That was a really, really good talk, and this is a great initiative. One thing this is more a comment than a question. One thing I really, really like about this is something that has worked against having a social safety net is this repeated myth of the undeserving person who will get something for free if we give what we need to the people who actually need stuff. In the 80s, Reagan used the mythical welfare cheat as the excuse for dismantling the welfare system and switching us to a food stamp system. So I am really, really glad to hear you say, yeah, we accept there's going to be some waste in the system, but we're going to make sure that everyone who needs this gets this. We're not going to be trying to police your use of this.
Yeah.
Please maintain that.
Oh, it's non-negotiable. I will just quit.
Yeah, so I think this is a very important initiative. And my question for it is, it's very difficult to ask for help in general, much less financial help. Has there been any forethought put into destigmatizing this?
So that's a great point. And in earlier drafts of this presentation that were going to be longer and less well organized, I talked for a time about personal circumstances where I, really could have asked my parents for $20 and figured that instead I should just not have cheese that week because I had other obligations that the cheese money was going to. And that sucks. It makes you feel small and awful to not have that. I think that part of the goal of this organization is, number one, to be able to depersonalize. You're now asking an organization whose sole purpose is to buy you cheese, and so you're not asking your parents and engaging with whatever complicated emotional dynamic has to do with you and financial independence and your parents and God knows what else. And that's one important component. But the more important side is normalizing just talking about financial realities. We're all underpaid, certainly relative to cost of living and relative to what our abilities would buy on the open market. And that's fine and true, and we should talk about it. And there's no shame in the fact that we make bad money and rent is too high and we all need things. And I want to, obviously, if people who, one of the ideas that I floated very early on was to ask people, of the first flight who get help, if we helped you, write a testimonial. Just say, if you feel comfortable saying, I needed to repair my car and then I had $100 and then I repaired my car. That will go a long way just to get people to normalize this and to make it more accepted within the Rosetta community that this organization exists to help people. I had seen your hand before Brian's finger.
Just a couple of questions, actually. The first is just a question of logistics. So the Rosetta community is pretty spread out across the world, and so we can certainly send videos and money to each other. Is there anything else we can share at this point, at this stage of rollout of this program?
I don't know. Videos and money are a really good start. Brian said social networks. I don't know. We can share social networks. So, Brian, talk. Answer that in the way you meant to.
And so, by that I mean, sometimes someone, in Palo Alto that might be able to help someone with the problem. Oh, let me make an email introduction.
Sure.
This person, I know this person. They're good. They're safe. Whatever. And we can help kind of grease those wheels too. I think a lot of us work in places where we're not from, so we know people in places where we don't live currently.
As a concrete example of this, not to just brutally cut you off, there's a lot of sort of scientific but not really reimbursable travel that often happens, such as you need to take this new job across the country, you've got to do an apartment search, you've got to stay somewhere, and you're down between an Airbnb and a week with couch surfing with friends that you may or may not have in this new city. But if you have a Rosetta referral network of couches, then all of a sudden the process of repeatedly moving across the country every several years becomes a lot less brutal. Now Brian's finger.
Okay. So to piggyback off of what you had asked about. So at the UW, so obviously people don't like to talk about finance. It's uncomfortable. We're not really practiced at it. And if you're having a hard time and you feel like you're the only one having a hard time, it can be somewhat embarrassing. But when we were going through the postdoc unionization process, we sent out some surveys to ask people about their rent. And that's how we have those statistics about rent burden and that kind of thing. And once we started that process, it was sort of anonymous. Like no one knew who was who. But once the stats were out, people really started talking about it. And eventually, postdocs were getting up in front of city council and saying, hey, I'm a postdoc at the University of Washington and I live in public housing. And I don't think this is what public housing was built for. Let's talk about, and so we started having these big conversations and people started standing up. And so I think it's important that we do talk about financial realities. And if people at your institution aren't talking about it, I would highly recommend unionizing. It's a great way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I should say every charity reflects some failure in public policy, right? Like every charity is a bit of a tragedy that like shouldn't have to happen. And similarly, it would be great if everybody has already won a union and there exists a welfare state, but there doesn't. And I want to fill that gap until to help build a parallel source of power until nobody can stop us from unionizing and building that welfare state. Other hands.
One final question. I think we will have to move.
And then we can also talk outside indefinitely, obviously. Yes.
So, have you considered what level of disclosure you're going to require from people that might be applying? Because I can imagine someone with like a highly stigmatized medical condition might not be comfortable disclosing that to the board.
Yeah, you don't have to tell us what you need the money for. Cool. Because again, if you want to say, I would like to take my partner out for a date, or I want a cooking class, or I need to make rent, you can say that. But if you want to say, I need $200 and I'm not comfortable saying why, it's probably not because you've found the slowest way to steal $200. And if it is, that's it itself its own trouble that you're going through, and take the $200, whatever. But honestly though, I think that's really important that we not place requirements like that. The one thing that just practically speaking we might need, and I'm not sure exactly how to navigate yet, is we need to establish that the random email address that we're going to Venmo is a real person that's the same, it's not just chrisball000@gmail.com is actually me every time. And so we might need some second party to say yes, I've emailed that Chris Ball before. It's him. Some kind of identity verification at a very low level, but that's literally it.
For-profit status entity, right? I mean,
we are a 501c3, so there are reporting requirements. Yes.
You're going to have an accountant, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because that didn't sound so.
I don't know. I will. So the accountant will in subsequent presentations rush on stage and just take me out at the knees. Yeah, hook me up with your brother. All right, that's definitely my time.
Yeah. So thank you again.